Thank you, David. Esteemed members of the Consular Corps, Mr. Chairman, Mr. CEO, Board of Governors for the Board of Trade, ladies and gentlemen, respected guests, lawyers. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous. I hope this afternoon, in the time available to me, I can dispense some worthwhile information to you. Actually, in my student career, this didn't happen virtually ever. So if you don't mind, for just long enough to call it a photo op, I'm going to stand beside the report card. Is that all? So look, to the Board of Trade, Ian, thank you for you and the board, the various departments and committees within the board to give me this opportunity. Ian, of course, a friend, a former colleague who distinguished himself through public service in Victoria. Ian, you have in a very short period of time breathed life and taken the Board of Trade to new heights, and I know the best is yet to come. But folks, you've got a great leader in Ian Black. I also, as all finance ministers, not just in British Columbia, but across Canada, stand in the shadow of Carol Taylor. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more about Carol in a purely professional way here in a few minutes. But I want you to know that in her time in public office, and for me particularly in the time that she spent as an MLA and our Minister of Finance, you could have no better mentor. And as I go through the material that you see here today, I want to make this point. None of this happens overnight. If it's going to happen and have the lasting impact we want it to have, it is the product of work that is undertaken over a period of time. And to the extent that our fiscal house is taking shape, it is because it is built on a firm foundation. And Carol, you are responsible for pouring a lot of the concrete on that foundation. Great to have you here. So my task in the time available to me, and it's may not be the podium address that you were looking for, but Premier Clark and I talked about this, and I said to her, and she agreed. We want to share with you where we are today, where we came from, and where we think we're going. Everything I talk about today involves resources that belong to you. The natural resources, the fiscal resources, they are yours. And the final preemptive thing I want to say is, to the extent that we are able to accomplish a result in the budget that people find favor with, it is a tribute to the leadership that those of us who serve in cabinet operate within. Premier Clark, from the day she took office, has been at the forefront of preaching the gospel of fiscal responsibility, and those of us who serve in her government receive that support and therefore are empowered to make decisions, sometimes difficult decisions, but ones that I believe, and she certainly does, that reflect well on us as a province on any kind of a comparative basis. Now, I'm going to leave the reaches here because I want to be able to point. Don't worry, I just saw that you guys have more buns over there, so I'll come join you in a moment. But I wanted to be able to point to a few things. Can you still hear me? All right. So where's Greg? Greg, put the first slide up on the wall. So here's, oh, that works very well, doesn't it? Great, I look like Alfred Hitchcock. When we do the budget, folks, as Carol will tell you, we're still in the fiscal year that began last February. And by the way, if something terrible happens, I just saw Chuck Keeling here. Chuck has seen this now for the 5th time. Chuck, if I go down, you carry on, okay? You just... When we tabled the budget last February, we were projecting a surplus of $184 billion. When I last updated people back in November, that improved. We were projecting the surplus of $444 million. Since then, you can see things have gotten a little better. We are anticipating more taxation revenue, personal and corporate income tax. That won't necessarily carry forward in other years. Natural resources revenues down, mostly gas, coal, some other fees down. ICBC is having a good year with their investment portfolio, and you see the increases. So the surplus we're anticipating now, folks, is in the neighborhood of $879 million. We believe that that will probably increase another $100 million. You can see the forecast allowance that we don't think we're going to need to use. So we may well be looking at a surplus of in the neighborhood of $1 billion for this fiscal year, which, as someone kindly mentioned, puts us in some very exclusive company. Actually, the Lonely Hearts Club band. Greg? It is this club. The only reason Saskatchewan is a different color than the rest of the country is they are still harboring some hope of being able to balance. I call that Rider Green, by the way. The rest of it, if we were being accurate, would be red. We are the only province on the right side of the ledger sheet, and you deserve to be proud about that fact, and it serves, it reflects well on us in a variety of ways. But how did we get there? And I suppose more importantly, what does the future look like? Greg? When finance ministers and Treasury Board staffs and ministries, finance ministries put together the budget, this is what drives most of the numbers. It is the forecasts that you see going forward. Now, there's two things about this chart that you need to know. One, the Forecast Council, comprising 12 of the best and the brightest economics minds in the country, provide us with the first number, the larger number. By the way, any economists in the room today? There must be some. Come on, admit it. I ask that because I just wanted to pay tribute to the fact that I haven't met a group that are as bold about predicting the past as economists. Good at that. Predict what happened in 2014. But what they give us these numbers, and you can see going forward, we take those and we downgrade them. I admit that. That's the first level of caution that we embed in your budget. If the Forecast Council is saying 2.8, we say 2.4. Now, I just got some news on the weekend today that the Conference Board of Canada has got us growing at 3%, so they're going up. Confirm that that'll place us in the lead in Canada. That's good. But we plan in a cautious way, and if those numbers hold true, then we're going to do slightly better than we are budgeted for. But in past years, having some room there has helped us a lot because the Forecast Council numbers have come down. So we'll see. Now, what does that mean in terms of economic performance, Greg? Let's go to the next one. We'll go through these kind of quickly. I just wanted to show you on the employment side, trends are in the right direction. You can see where the lines are going. I would still describe this as fairly modest growth. In 13, it was very modest, 0.1%. Last year, about 0.6. We're predicting 1% employment growth. We'd like to do better than that. And the partnership that we have with the private sector, attracting in capital, trade, we'll talk about all of that in a moment, but we'd like to see that spike up a little bit more than it's doing. Let's go to really a good news story, by and large a good news story in retail sales. Through most of last year, staff were coming to me and saying, Minister, retail sales are up well but beyond what we thought they would be. We were forecasting 3 point something. Right now it's up around 6%. So here's what guys like me are supposed to say about that. That's great news. People are feeling confident. It bodes well for how they view the future. I think it does all of those things. The only thing we've got to be careful of is consumer debt levels. because it's easy to get carried away with this. It is good news. Most of you, or many of you in business, will see this reflected. I'm told that the December numbers, January numbers, are very positive as well. But we're forecasting, we're still being cautious, we're still forecasting something in the 3.6 range for the year ahead on retail sales. Let's go to housing. I think we've got a housing slide. You can see pretty much average and stable. So for the construction sector, that's good news. For the forest sector, it's good news. The U.S. housing market seems to be coming back, so that will add to the good news for the forestry sector, coupled with what we've done in China. So on that front, we see positive signs. So how would I characterize all of this? I would say that stable growth, moderate growth. I would not endeavor to characterize this as spectacular growth. We get above 3%. If the conference board is right and we get above 3%, I'll say it's great. If we get above 4%, I'll start using words like spectacular. We're not there yet. We still have some work to do. Happily, we have some prospects and opportunities to build on these numbers, and they place us at the top of the heap in Canada, but we think we can do better. Greg? People ask me when I go to, Carol and I were talking about these finance ministers meetings that take place, and they can at times be a lively and interesting gatherings. They certainly are these days. But how did you do this? How did you get to where British Columbia is bucking the trend nationally? And I talk about two things, and I'll show you a little bit about this in a moment. First, I talk about expenditure control. Control the stuff that you can control to the extent that you can control it. We don't control currency. We don't control interest rates. We don't control those things. By and large, we control what we spend your money on. And even there are limitations. If we have a bad fire season that can range from $60 to $600 million, we have to spend money, sometimes unpredictably. But on balance, you can control a good portion of that. So that's one thing. The other thing that we have done, and this dates back to the early days of our government, 14 years ago, a concerted, and I must say, Premier Clark has added sort of new emphasis and impetus to this, diversifying our domestic economy. And I'll show you what that looks like. Go to the next slide, Greg. You go to a lot of jurisdictions, there's big pieces of the pie. We are far more diversified, for example, than Alberta, and I don't have to tell people how that works to our advantage. So all of the sectors, and you can pick the one that you're most directly impacted on. So that's part of that puzzle. But here's the next one, Greg. Our trade portfolio is more diversified than any other part of Canada. And that, coupled with a diversified domestic economy, means we've got a broader variety of goods and services to sell to a broader variety of customers. We've got folks here from the Ministry of International Trade. They will tell you that they are partners in the work that we do with the private sector. And to the extent that we can open doors, and government can open doors, but it's up to the private sector to take advantage. But you look at the advantages that accrue to us and the degree to which we are not as vulnerable as an Alberta or an Ontario because of this fact. And there's more work to be done. Now, we're proud of the advances that we've made of our forest sector and how it has moved into China and what that has meant for employment across British Columbia and opportunities. But what's the next frontier? What's the next opportunity? India looms. We're actually behind as a country when it comes to a jurisdiction like India. And so look for a new impetus. There is an opportunity. I just talked about India. I come back to China for a moment. How many of you have heard about the RMB trading hub? The renminbi. I just like saying that word, renminbi, don't you? It kind of rolls off your tongue. we fought hard. I don't want to say fight. We lobbied hard. We worked hard to impress upon the federal government, the Bank of Canada, the potential we thought this held for Canada. And we weren't shy about saying that because we understand and accept that portions of that are going to accrue to the financial services sector in Toronto. FX, currency trading, fair enough. Trade settlement, we have folks from Advantage BC here. There is a fit and an opportunity and an advantage for business, and one of the things that we are going to do and that we've made provision for in this budget is to work with business to make sure we all understand the opportunity that the R&B hub represents for businesses in BC to get a leg up and to benefit from first mover status by taking advantage of this. So stay tuned for that. There will be, but I don't know of many other circumstances that exist today where the chief financial officer can come in and say to the CEO, I know a way to get you 4% more in your bottom line. Forest company selling $250 million in forest products to China now stands through the use of the R&B tool to realize an additional $8 million gain just on transactional cost savings. So not something that a lot of people are fully alive to and aware of, but we think it's yet another advantage to the Asia-Pacific Gateway, and we intend to take advantage. Greg? All right, bottom line slide. Your money, where are we going? You see where we are today with the surplus. Notice one thing, the surpluses aren't as big for the next 3 years. We still have to be cautious. We have to be careful about embedding costs into our budget that continue year over year. Now, you'll see as well that we build some additional prudence or safety into that. You'll see the contingencies that exist there and the forecast allowance. My only observation around both is on a $46 billion budget, contingencies of 350 or even 400 million aren't that large. You're not going to believe this, but it happens. You know, something really unpredictable can happen, like a sudden shift in energy prices, for example. So in the grand scheme of things, we have what are termed happily healthy contingencies, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, at how quickly sometimes you need to access those contingencies. Nonetheless, 3 years of surpluses that are by any measure, comparatively in this country at least, healthy and provide us with some modest additional room. Greg? At those same meetings with the other finance ministers, they say, well, how do you do this? I talked about trade, I talked about diversification. Here's the other thing I talk about. I call it the tale of the two lines. And you know, economists have these very elaborate and complex matrices that analytics that they utilize. All are helpful, all are important. Here's simple country farmer / lawyer Mike's recipe for budgetary success. Keep the solid line above the dotted line. You keep the solid line above the dotted line, you're taking in a little more than you're paying out. And actually, you'll see where our revenues are increasing by 2.7, expenses by 2.5. Really easy to say, as the landscape will show, far less easy to execute upon. So far we've managed. Greg, I just want to talk a little bit about what that means and our debt levels, because there has been some public commentary around that. So the second club that we take pride in remaining members of, and we got there when Carol Taylor was the finance minister, AAA. You can see that internationally it's an exclusive club. I think France, Italy, and Greece have just been downgraded again. Of course, that means we got to get a bigger screen for Greece. But that's where we stand in terms of sovereign comparisons. On the sub-sovereign side within Canada, Greg, if you can, you'll see we are, along with Canada, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, distinguishable in where we sit. Now, I just want to say this. In addition to whatever bragging rights that affords us, and look, I hope, you know what, I actually hope when people, and in this room, everyone does, goes traveling and you meet colleagues and business associates, I hope you do take a measure of pride in the fact that you come from a province where the government is living within its means. And I hope that you don't hesitate in pointing out to prospective investors in your enterprise the advantage of investing in a jurisdiction where the government is living within its means. Why? Because you're a hell of a lot less likely to be met by a sudden shocking surprise somewhere down the road. So use this to your advantage, but there's another more tangible benefit. I said to Charles Sousa a few months ago, the finance minister in Ontario, I said, Charles, I'm sure glad I don't have to pay your borrowing costs. He sort of hung his head. It would be billions of dollars less in monies available for healthcare, education, public safety, environmental protection. It comes out of the operating side of the budget. So in addition to the bragging rights, there is a very tangible benefit that accrues to British Columbians for having achieved our standing in this group. Let's talk about debt for a moment. The standard measurement that agencies tend to use is debt to GDP. You can see where we stand in comparison to Ontario. They're about twice as high. Quebec 3 times. Canada less so, coming back in the right direction. When I travel to the U.S., by the way, I always put the U.S. bar chart up there just to make them mad, jealous. The chart has to be a lot higher when you put the U.S. debt to GDP number up there. So we compare very favorably, and we're headed in the right direction. Greg? Maintaining membership means we have to demonstrate that we are bringing our debt levels down to the right level. I don't want to keep picking on her, but I do so only with affection. Does anyone care to guess what the debt to GDP was at a certain point when Carol Taylor was finance minister? Guesses? Guesses? Yeah, Ian, you don't get to guess. You don't get to guess, and anyone associated with a casino doesn't get to guess. It was just below 13%. And I'll show you something else that happened back then that we're hoping to replicate. But you can see we're doing better than even our last budget predicted. We thought we were going to be up at around 18.2. We topped out there. We're coming down, and by the end of this fiscal plan, we're at 16.6. We don't just always hit these targets over the last number of years. We exceed them, but those are the targets. Similarly, debt to revenue trending in the precisely the right direction, which is what these international agencies that issue these things want to see. And they are report cards, and it does drive borrowing costs. Greg, let's go to the next. So this one and the next slide, and I'm coming to the end, quickly to the end of my time. I just want to take a moment because it's the Board of Trade, and you understand business, and you understand business fundamentals. It surprises me to what extent the landscape is littered with governments who forget basic fundamentals. Within our debt portfolio, and you can measure the debt in the way that I just did, sometimes you should just use the real numbers. Taxpayer-supported debt in British Columbia is about $45 billion. There's then some additional debt for agencies like BC Hydro that's called self-supporting debt, paid for by the revenue that a dam or a Site C generates. But taxpayers are directly responsible for about $45 billion. Part of that, the biggest part of it, you'll see in a moment, is for building things. Schools, hospitals, highways. But sadly, over the years, a portion of it relates to operating expenditures. When we became government in 2001, that direct operating debt stood at $15.2 billion. We managed to pay it down considerably, particularly through that one period that I'm going to talk about in a moment. When the recession hit, we made a decision, and you deserve to criticize or otherwise. We decided that in addition to cutting expenditures, we were going to maintain service levels for British Columbians at a certain level, and we borrowed money to do it. Those were the recent deficit years, 4 years. We borrowed $4 billion. I like to say we borrowed, I don't like to say it, but I'm obliged to say that we borrowed $4 billion to pay for the groceries. That money has to be paid back. At a minimum, that money, the other stuff has to be paid back too. So when you table a budget that shows a surplus of $1 billion, surprise, surprise, people emerge pretty quickly with all kinds of great ideas about how to spend the money. And I don't say that flippantly. There are any number of worthwhile endeavors upon which we, on your behalf, could allocate additional resources. But people forget this. Governments are great at borrowing money in bad days. And then when days start to improve, they forget about the fact that they borrowed the money. And I've said this before, and I don't think this is an oversimplification, but if you ignore this fact, what you're really saying to your kids and grandkids is, I want you to pay for my groceries. And none of us would do that. None of us would get our kids or grandkids to buy our groceries. We might borrow money and a mortgage to build some things that they would benefit by, but we wouldn't make them pay our groceries. So the first call on the surpluses going forward is to pay this down. And you can see we're making progress there. Now, let's, Greg, it's the last, I think the last bit on the debt. Something happened in British Columbia. There's different ways to describe this, folks. If you take the three periods here, I'm going to call the first one. Anyone remember Rod Serling, by the way? Remember what? We're about to enter a place where debt was actually paid off, where taxes were low. You're about to enter the Taylor zone. At this time, we were one of the few jurisdictions anywhere to actually pay down debt in real terms. Right in here. What does that mean? That means we had enough money to cover all of our groceries, all of our services. We had enough left over to pay for all of the building that we were doing. Didn't have to borrow. And we had enough left over to actually pay down some of the money that we had borrowed previously. Now, when you go into deficit, as we did here, you start borrowing to pay for the groceries and to pay for the building. We're at a deficit now. And you can see what's happening to our borrowing levels, and you can see that we're only borrowing now to build. And our objective is to get back to the Taylor zone. And when that line crosses here, or there, we'll be back there. It is not as far-fetched as some people would say to get there. It's not easy. God knows it's not easy. But we've been there before, and we can get back. So, where are we in terms of the split between borrowing to build and borrowing for the groceries? Greg, go to this next one. Oh, I've taken that one out. I just want you to see, for those of you in the building sectors, we're continuing to spend $10.7 billion over 3 years on infrastructure. There is a healthy disappeared. That's fine. So we're spending 10.7 on building, on infrastructure. A portion of that we're borrowing, but far less than we used to. In education, the budget goes up by the amount you see there, over 500 million. I will say this about education, though. This is K-12 education. We're increasing the budget, but we're also asking boards of education to find some administrative savings. And you've heard this, some of you, some kind of a heinous attack on, look, we do this across government. We do it across the healthcare sector. We have to horn in on those areas that are not directly related to the delivery of services and find better ways and more cost-effective ways to do these things. And I am not at all apologetic for saying to two organizations that operate side by side that both have payroll departments to say, look, get together and operate one payroll department and save some money for the taxpayers as a result. We can do this. It doesn't happen overnight, but I don't want anyone to leave thinking that, you know, we're balancing on the backs of core services. I'll show you, well, I'll show you now. Let's actually, I wanted to tell you about this, by the way. We did eliminate the circumstance in which people who receive social assistance were having an amount deducted for maintenance. One of the advantages of being in a position where we have a few more choices available to us, our fiscal health has improved, and we think that's an appropriate thing to do. Similarly, for folks, community living, people with disabilities, those budgets have gone up. That budget has gone up significantly. Healthcare. I think we're on to healthcare. Greg? Oh, before we get to healthcare. Surprise, surprise. You know, some of you I see have been taking pictures. If you want copies of all this top secret material, just call me. I'll gladly provide it to you. But here's what I wanted to show you folks on this one. I want you to look just at one column, because there is the column for a couple with 2 children under the age of 6 earning $30,000. You can just see that down there. Do you see that? 2 kids under the age of 6. Because here's the notion that you hear periodically. Again, the government doesn't care about or isn't interested in sharing some of the benefits of our circumstance with lower income British Columbians. And so I wanted to bring all of the stuff that we're doing together in one place. And these numbers are different for differing circumstances. But for this family with the 2 kids, $30,000, that's not a lot of money to raise 2 kids. But in addition to that, they are getting over $1,200 from starting in April on the BC Early Child Tax Benefit. These other benefits that accrue, they get from the federal and provincial government another, as you can see there, $11,500. And most of that's not taxable. That doesn't make it easy to raise those 2 kids, but the suggestion that we haven't found a way to share some of the benefits, in my view, is unfair. Because when those kids turn 6, they're going to get a check for $1,200 each for direct deposit into a registered educational savings program that the federal government will provide matching dollars, and the process of ensuring that there's money available for their training and education 10 years down the road begins. Those are real dollars. Those are real benefits. And we're in a position to do that in BC now without having a budget that is in deficit. All right, let's go to the next one, Greg. Who's been to Fenway? Anyone been to Fenway Park? What's the thing called at right field in the back? The big green monster. This is my Fenway slide. The big green monster. When Carol was signing off on the finance documents, I think the healthcare budget was $7 or $8 billion. It's going to 18. And that in a province that has been criticized for artificially constraining the growth in the healthcare budget. Carol reminded me she got pilloried for holding the growth to 6%. We're now down below 3% in year-over-year growth. It still works out to over $3 billion over the 3 years. If we don't come to terms with this, folks, if other provinces who claim to be interested in arriving at a balance don't come to terms with this, you can't do it. You simply cannot do it. And so there has been, for example, criticism around the fact that MSP premiums have gone up. And they have. On January of next year, a single registrant will see their monthly MSP premium go up $3 a month. For the family, it's slightly more than $6. The budget in the time that I have been an elected MLA has tripled. And it is false and misleading to suggest that that money doesn't have to come from somewhere. MSP premiums account, of that $18 billion figure, MSP premiums account for 13%. 13%. I do want to tell you this, though. 800,000 British Columbians, low-income British Columbians, don't pay MSP premiums, and another 200,000 pay significantly reduced. So we do adjust the relief for lower-income British Columbians upwards each time. But I don't want to pretend that that ever-increasing healthcare budget can simply look after itself, because the funding has to come from somewhere. It's publicly funded healthcare, not free healthcare. Let's go to the next one. I think I'm going to more or less, I'm going to do two more after this, folks. Stand by, hang in there. Anyone here from Quebec? I mean, no one's admitting it. Madame. Quelle ville de Québec? Montréal? Ah, Montréal, j'aime beaucoup Montréal. La vieille Montréal. L'hiver, les Canadiens, qui la fleur. Pauline? I love Quebec. I love Montreal. I love Quebec City. I'm not going to ask you what you make. Let us, for the sake of this discussion, just this discussion, assume that you are making in the neighborhood of $122,000. For anyone making that or less, you pay the lowest provincial income tax in the country. If you're making that amount, in BC, you pay $10,037 in provincial income tax. If you were to be seduced, although I can't imagine it happening this week, to Calgary, you'd pay $1 more. Although I expect that's going to change, Colleen. But if you decided you wanted to assume ownership of the family estate in Westmount and back to Quebec, you'd pay $18,290. That is the magnitude, and as you move east, folks, you see, that is the, so stay with us, Colleen. The magnitude of the difference is quite staggering and something that we're proud of. We probably don't do as good a job as we should telling the story, and that you need to tell the story to folks that you're trying to attract to come work with you here in British Columbia. Because as compared to particularly jurisdictions in the East, Central Canada, it is a tremendous advantage. All right, a couple of final things then on the taxation front. We wanted to ensure that people understand preventative health care is still important, so some pretty modest tax credits for families around recreational activity, buying equipment for the kids. For Greg next on the mining sector, you'll see that we've followed through and continued some of the credits that have made mining such a success story. Digital media, film and television production, all sectors of the economy that are doing well. And then finally, Greg, folks, I talked about the diversified economy. I won't talk a lot about the SPCA. That's just something we think they do good work, and they haven't had support, and their infrastructure is in needs replacement. Aerospace, 10,000 British Columbians making great family supporting wages. Pardon the pun, they've been flying under the radar screen. We have a partnership with them. We're going to grow aerospace. We're selling aircraft made in BC to China. We're selling technology developed in British Columbia right around the world. If you're in Europe this summer and there's a forest fire, it is a British Columbia built, designed, flown aircraft putting that fire out. It's quite something what we have done. It is beginning to garner notice within Canada. It is already garnering notice around the world. The Maritime Centre in the 1980s, early 1990s, fully 20 shipping firms, not shipbuilders, shipping firms, shipping companies called Vancouver Home. We are the Asia Pacific Gateway. We want Vancouver and British Columbia to be their home port, not just a port of call. And the partnership that we're launching with the shipping sector, we hope, will bring some of those companies back and all of the ancillary services that go with it. We're going to make sure people in the agri-food sector understand the importance of marketing, buying local, and partnering with them. And rural connectivity and the internet, we're accelerating that 3 years ahead of where we thought we'd be by injecting some additional funds. Look, I'm and my colleagues and Premier Clark are grateful and flattered by the marks, by the response. We've got a long ways to go. We're not where we want to be. I don't want you to misinterpret the absence within the budget of reference to LNG as signaling anything other than a commitment we gave not to make assumptions from a budgeting point of view until a final investment decision has been made. It will be made. The fundamentals that have attracted proponents to British Columbia, to Western Canada, have not changed. There has been, to be sure, some volatility in the energy pricing markets, but the companies that came here because of our proximity to Europe, because of the availability of the resource, because of the technology, because of the stability, are all here, and they are all continuing to plan for final investment. But all of the benefits that accrue from that are on top of what I have showed you today. And that too has been part of our recipe for success. Finally, we understand that at the end of the day, none of us in government are responsible for creating employment and opportunities. That's up to all of you. We try to create a landscape and a climate within which you are able in this international world to speak to others, colleagues, and make the pitch for us about why it makes sense to come to Canada and why it makes sense to come to British Columbia. I'm pleased that by and large you find favor with the document, the budget we've tabled. It is your money. It proposes to dispense the benefits of your hard work. Ian and to the board at the Vancouver Board of Trade, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I've taken far more time than I should have, but I appreciate very much your attentiveness. Thank you very much.